the best player in the country?
I feel like I'm the best player in the country.
WNBA draft. The Indiana Fever select Caitlin Clark, University.
Win this game, and then we get down to the end of regulation, you guys. And I'm like, okay, Ron Howard, open three. She's going to hit it. No, she does not. Angel, you got it. Put back layup, game winner. No. And then Nas again caught it. Put it up. No. I'm just like, oh my God. Like, are we serious? How does that happen? And all of you guys, baby, my girl, Angel.
The Atlanta Dream just turned on Angel Reese after leaked footage showed her screaming at a teammate, and the basketball world is processing what has happened as the most organizationally concentrated and the most internally documented single-team accountability event the Reese story has produced, in the most publicly visible and the most institutionally revealing form. That leaked footage of a player screaming at a teammate inside a professional team environment can generate in the most commercially significant competitive landscape women's basketball has ever created. The Atlanta Dream turning on a player is not a routine organizational accountability event. It is a specific and formally documented institutional statement from the franchise most directly responsible for the competitive environment in which the player's conduct most specifically occurred, that the conduct the leaked footage most specifically documents has crossed whatever organizational threshold the franchise's internal accountability standards most specifically established for the kind of team conduct whose public documentation in the most leaked and the most publicly visible form available creates the specific organizational accountability situation the Dream's turning most specifically and most institutionally concentratedly represents. Today I am breaking down exactly what the leaked footage shows, why the Atlanta Dream's organizational response to the footage constitutes a turning that is analytically distinct from the standard team management of a difficult internal competitive situation, what the leaked footage of Reese screaming at a teammate reveals about the specific competitive and personal dynamics of the Dream's team environment in the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form that leaked internal team footage can provide, and what the combination of the leaked footage and the Dream's turning tells you about where the Reese story is heading in its most organizationally concentrated and its most internally documented single-team accountability dimension. And stay with me, because at the 10-minute mark I am going to show you the specific element of the leaked footage that the mainstream coverage is treating as the most dramatic visual evidence of the screaming, when it is actually the most analytically significant element and the one that changes how the organizational accountability situation the Dream's turning most specifically represents needs to be understood in the most complete team environment and competitive culture context the leaked footage most precisely provides. The organizational relationship between Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream has been developing in the specific competitive and commercial context of everything the Reese story has produced across the most dramatically escalating competitive and commercial sequence the Clark era has generated, from the missed game-winning layup through the Clark laugh, through the going ballistic, through the Reebok cancellation, through the lawsuit threat, through the national television accountability statements from Stephen A. Smith and the WNBA legend. Each of those successive developments has added a specific competitive, commercial, legal, and media accountability dimension to the Reese story that the preceding videos in this series have documented and analyzed in their most institutionally complete and most commercially honest analytical forms. The Atlanta Dream's organizational turning on Reese after the leaked footage of her screaming at a teammate is the most internally concentrated and the most organizationally specific single accountability event the Reese story has produced, because it represents the accountability not from the external commercial ecosystem, the legal institutional framework, or the sports media platform, but from the specific internal team environment where Reese's most immediate and most personally concentrated professional relationships are most directly organized, and where the competitive culture and the team accountability standards that the Dream's organizational governance is most specifically responsible for maintaining are most directly and most personally tested by the kind of internal competitive conduct the leaked footage of screaming at a teammate most publicly and most institutionally revealingly documents. Let us start with what the leaked footage specifically shows, because the precise content of the recorded footage is the analytical foundation of everything that follows, and the mainstream coverage has been treating the leaked footage primarily as the dramatic visual evidence of an organizational turning story. Without examining the specific team environment and competitive culture dimensions the footage most precisely documents, and why those dimensions are the most analytically significant elements of the organizational accountability situation the Dream's turning most specifically and most institutionally concentratedly represents. The leaked footage shows Reese screaming at a teammate in the specific internal team environment context that the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form of leaked internal team footage can provide, as the most direct and the most personally concentrated visual evidence of the competitive culture and the team accountability dynamics the Dream's organizational governance is most specifically responsible for maintaining. The screaming characterization is the most honest and the most accurate description of the specific conduct the footage most directly documents, and the specific nature of the screaming, its intensity, its direction at a specific teammate, its competitive and personal content, and its specific competitive and team environment context are the analytical elements that most directly determine what the leaked footage most precisely communicates about the competitive culture and the team accountability dynamics of the Dream's internal team environment at the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing level available in the specific form the leaked footage most directly provides. The organizational accountability situation the screaming at a teammate creates in the most publicly documented form available is the situation that most specifically engages the Dream's organizational governance responsibilities for the competitive culture and the team accountability standards that the Dream's internal organizational management is most directly obligated to maintain in the specific competitive and commercial context of the most commercially significant competitive environment women's basketball has ever produced. Now let us talk about why the Dream turning on Reese constitutes an organizational turning rather than simply standard team management of an internal competitive situation, because this is the analytically significant distinction that the mainstream coverage is treating as the organizational context of a dramatic team story without examining the specific organizational conduct the turning characterization most accurately represents, and why that conduct crosses from the standard team management of internal competitive culture challenges into the territory the turning characterization most specifically and most institutionally honestly describes. The Atlanta Dream turning on Reese after the leaked footage of her screaming at a teammate is not the standard organizational response of a franchise managing a difficult internal competitive situation in the most professionally directed institutional form that professional sports team management most typically deploys for the most internal and the most organizationally specific single competitive culture challenges. It is the specific and formally documented organizational accountability statement from the franchise whose internal organizational management is most directly responsible for the competitive culture the leaked footage most publicly documents that the specific conduct the footage most directly shows has produced the organizational accountability situation whose most adequate institutional response requires the specific organizational action the turning characterization most accurately represents in its most institutionally honest and most organizationally complete analytical form. The distinction between standard team management of internal competitive culture challenges and the organizational turning the Dream's response most specifically represents is the distinction that determines whether the organizational accountability situation the leaked footage has created is being adequately engaged with by the franchise whose governance obligations to its players, its competitive environment, and its organizational integrity are most directly tested by the kind of internal competitive conduct the leaked footage of screaming at a teammate most publicly and most institutionally revealingly documents. Now let us talk about what the leaked footage reveals about the competitive culture and team dynamics of the Dream's internal team environment, because this is the analytically significant layer that the organizational accountability framing of the mainstream coverage is most consistently failing to examine with the analytical depth and the team environment specificity, the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form of leaked internal team footage most urgently requires. The leaked footage of Reese screaming at a teammate provides the most direct and the most personally concentrated visual evidence of the competitive culture and the team accountability dynamics of the Dream's internal team environment at the specific organizational level, where the competitive culture the Dream's governance is most directly responsible for maintaining is most immediately and most personally tested by the individual competitive conduct of each player in the most internal and the most organizationally concentrated single team environment context. The screaming at a teammate in the most publicly documented form available is the specific individual competitive conduct that most directly engages the Dream's organizational accountability for the competitive culture its internal team environment most specifically produces, and the specific team environment and competitive culture dimensions the footage most precisely documents are the analytically significant elements of the organizational accountability situation the Dreams turning most specifically and most institutionally concentratedly represents as the most internally concentrated and the most organizationally specific single-team accountability event the Reese story has produced, in the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form. Now let us talk about the specific accountability implications the leaked footage creates for Reese's competitive and organizational future, because this is the layer that has the most direct implications for how the most organizationally concentrated and the most internally documented single-team accountability event the Reese story has produced affects her professional relationship with the specific team environment where the leaked footage's most publicly documented competitive conduct occurred. The accountability implications of leaked footage showing a professional athlete screaming at a teammate in the internal team environment of a professional sports franchise are the specific organizational accountability implications that the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form of internal team conduct documentation most directly creates for the individual whose specific conduct is most publicly and most institutionally revealingly documented in the most directly visual and the most personally concentrated form the leaked footage most specifically provides. For Reese, in the specific organizational context of the Atlanta Dreams turning on her after the leaked footage, the accountability implications are the most organizationally concentrated and the most institutionally specific single set of professional accountability consequences the Reese story has generated from inside the specific professional team environment where her most immediate and most personally concentrated professional relationships are most directly organized. The Dreams organizational turning is the franchise's formal organizational accountability statement that the specific conduct the leaked footage most directly documents has produced the organizational accountability situation whose most adequate institutional response requires the specific organizational action the turning most accurately represents, and the accountability implications of that turning for Reese's competitive and organizational future within the Dreams team environment are the most organizationally specific and the most internally concentrated single professional accountability consequences the leaked footage has generated in the most institutionally revealing form. Now let us zoom all the way out, because the Atlanta Dream turning on Reese after the leaked footage of her screaming at a teammate is not simply the most organizationally concentrated and the most internally documented single-team accountability event the Reese story has produced. It is the institutional event that most specifically and most organizationally concentratedly adds the internal team environment accountability dimension to the Reese story's most dramatically escalating competitive and commercial sequence, by providing the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form of evidence that the competitive conduct and competitive character challenges the missed game-winning layup sequence has most publicly generated in its most commercially significant external accountability dimensions are also present in the most internal and the most organizationally concentrated form of the specific professional team environment where Reese's most immediate and most personally concentrated professional relationships are most directly and most organizationally specifically organized around the competitive culture and the team accountability standards the Dreams organizational governance is most directly obligated to maintain. The leaked footage adds the most internally documented and the most organizationally specific accountability dimension to the Reese story in the specific form that makes the organizational turning the most institutionally honest and the most organizationally complete accountability statement the Dreams governance obligations most specifically require in the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form the leaked footage most directly and most visually provides. The accountability coalition that has been engaging with the Reese story from outside the specific professional team environment now has the most internally documented and the most organizationally specific form of evidence that the competitive conduct and competitive character dimensions of the story extend into the most internal and the most personally concentrated professional relationship context, where the Dreams organizational accountability obligations are most directly and most specifically engaged by the kind of conduct the leaked footage most publicly documents. Remember the most analytically significant element of the leaked footage? Here it is. The specific element of the leaked footage that the mainstream coverage is treating as the most dramatic visual evidence of the screaming, when it is actually the most analytically significant element, is not the most intense moment of the screaming itself. It is the specific competitive and team environment context that surrounds the screaming in the footage, the specific situation in the team environment that preceded the screaming, the specific identity of the teammate being screamed at, and what that identity most specifically reveals about the competitive and team dynamic dimensions of the organizational accountability situation the footage most publicly documents, and the specific competitive culture dimension of the team environment that the screaming's organizational context most institutionally and most organizationally revealingly captures in the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form the leaked footage most directly provides. Here is what the mainstream coverage is almost entirely missing about the dream turning on Reese after the leaked footage, and why together they matter, beyond the immediate drama of the most organizationally concentrated and the most internally documented single-team accountability event the Reese story has produced. The specific organizational governance implications of the dream's turning on Reese for the franchise's internal accountability standards and competitive culture governance obligations are the dimension of the story that has the most lasting institutional implications for how the dream's organizational governance engages with the competitive culture and team accountability challenges that the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form of leaked internal team footage most specifically creates in the most commercially significant competitive environment women's basketball has ever produced. The Dream's organizational turning is not simply the franchise's response to a specific and publicly documented individual competitive conduct situation. It is the franchise's most formal available organizational statement about the competitive culture and team accountability standards its internal organizational management is most directly obligated to maintain. And the specific organizational conduct the turning most accurately represents is the most institutionally complete and the most organizationally honest single accountability statement the franchise's governance obligations most specifically require in the most publicly documented and the most institutionally revealing form the leaked footage has created. The second hidden angle is the specific effect of the dreams turning on the broader competitive community's engagement with the leaked footage and the competitive culture and team accountability dimensions the footage most publicly documents. Because the organizational accountability statement the dreams turning most specifically represents creates the most direct and the most organizationally concentrated institutional incentive for the competitive community's formal engagement with the competitive culture standards, the leaked footage most publicly and most institutionally revealingly challenges in the most internally documented and the most organizationally specific form.